A widow with a loaded pistol and a sharp mind walks into a town that thinks 50 means finished. Marion Whitcomb wasn't supposed to be dangerous. She was supposed to fade into silence, accept scraps, bow her head. But when she stepped off that stagecoach in Redstone, Kansas, with a leather satchel full of ledgers and a derringer strapped to her ankle, she'd already survived things that would have broken younger women. Now a corrupt merchant wants her compliant. A patient cowboy wants her trust. And Marion? She wants what no one thinks she deserves anymore. A life entirely her own. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Marion's story travels. The stagecoach lurched to a stop, throwing Marion Whitcomb forward hard enough that her shoulder hit the window frame. She didn't gasp or cry out. She'd learned years ago that making noise only invited attention, and attention invited questions she had no intention of answering. Outside, Redstone, Kansas looked like every other prairie town she'd passed through. Wooden buildings leaning slightly to the left, dust thick enough to choke on, and men standing in loose clusters eyeing the coach like it might produce something worth stealing. She smoothed her dark traveling dress, checked the pins in her graying hair, and felt for the weight of the derringer tucked into the custom pocket she'd sewn into her petticoat. Still there, still loaded. "Redstone!" the driver shouted, his voice cracked from dust and whiskey. "Anyone getting off? Do it now. We ain't waiting." Marion stood, ignoring the stiffness in her knees. 50 years old, and her body reminded her of every single one some mornings. But she'd walked through worse than stiff knees. She'd walked through a husband's funeral with nothing but $43 and a house the bank took 3 weeks later. She'd walked through jobs that paid half what men earned for the same work, boarding houses that wouldn't rent to women alone, and more than one employer who thought bookkeeper meant something entirely different behind closed doors. She stepped down from the coach without help. The driver didn't offer any. The main street stretched before her, rutted and raw. A general store. A saloon already leaking piano music even though it wasn't yet noon. A building with a faded sign reading Crowley Mercantile and Freight. That one. That was where she'd be working, assuming Silas Crowley still needed a bookkeeper and hadn't hired some young thing in the 6 weeks since his letter arrived. Marion picked up her satchel, heavy with the few books she owned and the ledger sheets she'd brought from her last position, and started walking. A man in a too-clean suit stepped out from the mercantile, 40-something, soft around the middle, with the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Whitcomb?" "Miss," Marion corrected. She'd gone back to her maiden name after Robert died. Seemed cleaner that way. The man blinked. "I was told you were widowed." "I am. But I'm unmarried now, so Miss Whitcomb suits me fine." His smile tightened just a fraction. "I'm Silas Crowley. Welcome to Redstone. I trust your journey was tolerable?" "It was a stagecoach, Mr. Crowley. Tolerable isn't the word I'd use, but I arrived, and that's what matters." He laughed, but it sounded forced. "Indeed. Well, come inside. I'll show you the office, and we can discuss the particulars of your employment." Marion followed him into the mercantile. It was bigger than she'd expected, shelves stocked with everything from tinned goods to bolts of fabric, farm tools hanging from the ceiling, barrels of flour and sugar lined up along one wall. Business was clearly good, which made her wonder why Crowley's books were supposedly in such disarray that he'd advertised for help all the way to St. Louis. He led her past the main floor to a back office. The door stuck when he pushed it, scraping against the floorboards. Inside, papers covered every surface. Ledgers lay open on the desk, some with pages torn out, others with columns that didn't add up even at a glance. Invoices were stuffed into crates. Receipts were pinned to the wall with no apparent system. Marion set her satchel down carefully. "How long has it been like this?" "My previous bookkeeper left rather suddenly," Crowley said, "some months ago. I've been managing as best I can, but I'm a merchant, not a numbers man." That was a lie. Anyone who ran a business this size understood numbers. But Marion didn't call him on it. Not yet. She needed this job. Needed the $30 a month he'd offered in his letter, plus room and board. It wasn't generous, but it was steady. And steady mattered more than generous when you had nothing to fall back on. "I'll need a few days to sort through this and understand your system," she said. "Of course. I've arranged for you to stay at Mrs. Talbot's boarding house, just down the street. Clean rooms, decent meals. I'll expect you here at 7 each morning." "6 would be better," Marion said. "I work best before the day gets loud." Crowley's expression shifted, just briefly, into something that might have been annoyance, but he nodded. 6 then. I'll have a key made for you. He walked her to the boarding house himself, making small talk about the town, the weather, the railroad that was supposedly coming through in the next year or two. Marian listened but didn't engage much. She'd learned that men like Crowley preferred the sound of their own voices anyway. Mrs. Talbot was a narrow woman with sharp eyes and a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. She showed Marian to a room on the second floor, small, clean enough, with a bed that didn't sag too badly and a window that looked out onto the street. "Breakfast at 6:30, Mrs. Talbot said. "Supper at 6. No men in the rooms, no drinking, no noise after 9. "Understood," Marian said. Mrs. Talbot lingered in the doorway. "You're older than I expected." "I'm exactly as old as I am," Marian replied evenly. The landlady sniffed. "Most women your age are settled, married, not traipsing around the territory looking for work." "Most women my age didn't have a choice about being settled," Marian said. "I do." Mrs. Talbot left without another word. Marian closed the door, leaned against it, and let herself breathe. The room smelled like lye soap and old wood. The afternoon light slanted through the window, catching the dust in the air. She could hear voices from the street below, the clatter of a wagon, someone shouting about the price of corn. She unpacked slowly. 3 dresses. 1 for work, 1 for church, if she ever went, 1 for winter. Undergarments. A nightgown. The Derringer, which she slipped under her pillow. The books. A worn copy of Sense and Sensibility, a journal she'd kept since Robert died, and a mathematics primer she'd bought secondhand because numbers made sense in a way people rarely did. She sat on the edge of the bed and opened the journal. The last entry was dated 3 weeks ago, written in a boarding house in Topeka, after the bank where she'd been working let her go. No explanation, just a polite note saying they were restructuring and her services were no longer required. She knew what that meant. A younger woman had walked in, smiled the right way, and Marian became inconvenient. She picked up the pen, dipped it in ink, and wrote, "Arrived in Redstone." "The work looks worse than Crowley described, but I've seen worse. The town is rough, the people are suspicious, but I'm here, and I'm staying until I decide otherwise. No one else gets to make that choice for me. Not anymore." She blew on the ink to dry it, closed the journal, and lay back on the bed. Her body ached in all the familiar places. But she wasn't dead yet, and as long as she wasn't dead, she'd keep moving. The next morning, Marian arrived at the Mercantile at 10 minutes to 6. The street was still mostly dark, the sky just beginning to pale at the edges. Crowley wasn't there yet. She tried the door, unlocked, and let herself in. The office looked even worse in the early light. She rolled up her sleeves, pulled the first ledger toward her, and started reading. 3 hours later, she'd uncovered the first problem. Crowley was recording sales but not expenses. Or rather, he was recording some expenses but not consistently, and not in any way that made it possible to track profit margins. Invoices didn't match deliveries. Receipts were missing dates. Some entries were in his handwriting. Others weren't. She was deep in a stack of freight invoices when the door opened and Crowley walked in. He stopped short when he saw her, then recovered quickly. "You're early," he said. "I'm on time. You're late." His jaw tightened. "I had business to attend to." "Your business is here," Marian said, gesturing to the chaos on the desk. "And it's a mess, Mr. Crowley. I'm going to need access to every ledger, every receipt, every contract you've signed in the past year, possibly longer." "That's not necessary." "It is if you want accurate books. Right now, I couldn't tell you if you're making money or losing it." Crowley stepped closer, looming slightly. He was taller than her, broader. She didn't flinch. "I hired you to organize my records, Miss Whitcomb, not to question my business practices." "If your business practices are why your records are in disorder, then I have to question them," Marian said calmly. "That's what you're paying me for." For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then Crowley smiled, thin and cold. "You're more opinionated than I expected. You hired me for my skill, not my silence." "Fair enough." He moved to the door. "I'll have my clerk bring you the additional records. But I expect discretion, Miss Whitcomb. What happens in this office stays in this office." "Agreed," Marian said. "As long as what's happening is legal." Crowley's smile didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Of course. He left. Marian exhaled slowly and went back to the ledgers. By the end of the first week, Marian had discovered 3 more problems. First, Crowley was underreporting sales to avoid taxes. Not by much, just enough to stay under certain thresholds. It was clever, in a way, also illegal. Second, he was overcharging customers on credit and pocketing the difference. Again, small amounts. A few cents here, $1 there. But it added up, and it explained why some of the receipts didn't match the ledger entries. Third, someone else had been skimming. The handwriting in some of the ledgers didn't match Crowley's, and the missing amounts were larger, sloppier. Whoever had been doing it had either gotten greedy or careless. Marian sat back in her chair and rubbed her temples. She'd worked for dishonest men before. It wasn't shocking, but it was tiresome. And it put her in a position she didn't want to be in, caught between doing her job correctly and keeping a job at all. She was still weighing her options when the door opened and a man walked in. He wasn't Crowley. Younger, maybe late 30s, with sun-darkened skin, brown hair that needed cutting, and the kind of build that came from actual work, not from standing behind a counter. He wore dusty trousers, a faded shirt, and boots that had seen a lot of miles. "Help you?" Marian asked. He pulled off his hat. "I'm looking for Silas Crowley. He's not here. Can I take a message?" The man hesitated, glancing at the papers on her desk. "You're the new bookkeeper." "I am." "Ethan Hale," he said, extending a hand. "I run cattle through here a few times a year. Crowley usually handles my supply orders." Marian shook his hand. His grip was firm, but not crushing. "Marian Whitcomb, if you tell me what you need, I can pass it along." "Appreciate it." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and handed it to her. "Supplies for the next drive. Nothing fancy, just basics." Marian scanned the list: flour, coffee, salt pork, tobacco, rope. Standard trail provisions. "When do you need it?" 2 weeks, give or take. Depends on the weather." "I'll make sure Mr. Crowley knows." Ethan nodded, but he didn't leave. He stood there, turning his hat in his hands, looking like he wanted to say something but wasn't sure how. "Is there something else?" Marian asked. "You new to Redstone?" "Arrived last week." "What brought you here?" "Work," Marian said simply. "Same as most people, I'd guess." Ethan smiled, small but genuine. "Fair enough. Well, welcome to town, Miss Whitcomb. Hope it treats you decent." "I'll settle for tolerable," Marian said. He laughed at that, a low, easy sound. "Tolerable's about right for Redstone." He settled his hat back on his head. "I'll be back in a few days to check on that order." "I'll have it ready." He tipped his hat and left. Marian watched him go, then turned back to her work. But something about the exchange stuck with her. Ethan Hale hadn't looked at her like she was invisible, hadn't talked to her like she was an inconvenience. He'd just been polite, straightforward. It was such a small thing. But small things mattered when you'd spent years being overlooked. The second week brought rain. Not the gentle kind, but the hard, relentless kind that turned the streets into rivers of mud and made every step outside a misery. Marian wore her oldest dress and thickest shawl and still arrived at the mercantile soaked through most mornings. Crowley noticed. "You could wait until the weather clears," he said one morning, eyeing her damp skirts with disapproval. "The work doesn't wait for weather," Marian replied. "Still, a woman your age should be more careful. You'll catch your death." Marian looked up from the ledger she was balancing. "I've survived worse than rain, Mr. Crowley." He didn't like that answer. She could see it in the tightness around his mouth. But he didn't argue. She was beginning to understand Silas Crowley. He was a man who needed control, needed to be the smartest person in the room, the one making decisions, the one people deferred to. And Marian's presence, her competence, her refusal to simper or apologize, unsettled him. Good, she thought. Let him be unsettled. She'd spent too many years making herself smaller to fit into spaces that didn't want her. She was done with that. By mid-afternoon, she'd finished reconciling the freight accounts and started on the customer credit ledger. That's when she found the next problem. A name appeared repeatedly, always with large purchases, always on credit, but with no payments recorded. She cross-referenced it with the receipt files. Nothing. She checked the invoice records. Still nothing. The name was J. Brennan. She was still puzzling over it when Crowley returned from whatever business he'd been conducting. Mr. Crowley, she said. Who's Jay Brennan? His expression went carefully blank. Why do you ask? Because there's nearly $300 in unpaid credit under that name, and I can't find any record of payment or even an attempt to collect. That's a private matter. It's also affecting your profit margin, Marion said. If this debt isn't going to be collected, it needs to be written off. If it is, I need to know so I can track it properly. Crowley stepped closer to the desk. His voice dropped. Miss Whitcomb, I appreciate your thoroughness, but there are some things that don't require your attention. Everything in these books requires my attention. That's what you hired me for. I hired you to organize records, not to pry into my personal affairs. Marion set down her pen. Mr. Crowley, if you want me to keep accurate books, I need accurate information. If there are accounts you don't want me to touch, tell me now so I can note them as restricted. But don't expect me to ignore discrepancies and still produce honest records. For a moment, she thought he might fire her on the spot. His face flushed, his hands clenched at his sides. But then he took a breath and forced a smile. You're right, of course. I'll provide you with the details on the Brennan account by tomorrow. Thank you. He left the office. Marion went back to her work, but her hands were shaking slightly. She'd pushed, maybe too hard, but she couldn't do her job halfway, and she wouldn't lie in a ledger to protect a man's secrets. If he fired her, she'd find another job. It might take time. It might mean leaving Redstone. But she'd done it before, and she'd do it again. She wasn't afraid of starting over. She'd been doing it her whole life. That evening, Marion ate supper at the boarding house in silence. The other residents, 2 shop clerks and a traveling salesman, didn't speak to her much. She was older, female, and kept to herself. That made her strange, and strange wasn't welcome. She didn't mind. She'd never been good at small talk anyway. After supper, she went to her room and tried to read, but her mind kept drifting back to the Brennan account. $300 was a significant sum. Not enough to destroy Crowley's business, but enough to matter. And the fact that he'd gotten defensive when she asked about it suggested it wasn't a simple case of a customer falling behind on payments. She was still thinking about it when someone knocked on her door. She tensed, reached for the Derringer under her pillow, then called, "Who is it?" "Mrs. Talbot, you have a visitor downstairs." A visitor? Marion frowned. She didn't know anyone in Redstone except Crowley, and he wouldn't come to the boarding house. She slipped the Derringer into her pocket, just in case, and went downstairs. Ethan Hale was standing in the front parlor, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. Mrs. Talbot hovered nearby, watching with undisguised curiosity. "Mr. Hale," Marion said, surprised. "Is something wrong with your order?" "No, ma'am. Order's fine. He glanced at Mrs. Talbot, then back at Marion. "I wondered if you might take a walk with me. Weather's cleared up, and I thought you might like some air." Marion hesitated. She didn't know this man, didn't know what he wanted. But something in his expression, earnest, a little nervous, made her think he wasn't dangerous. "All right," she said. "Let me get my shawl." Mrs. Talbot's eyebrows shot up, but Marion ignored her and went back upstairs. She grabbed her shawl, checked that the Derringer was still in her pocket, and returned to the parlor. Ethan offered his arm. Marion took it, and they stepped out into the cool evening. The street was quiet, the mud from the rain starting to dry into hard ruts. Lamps glowed in a few windows. Somewhere, a dog barked. They walked in silence for a moment, then Ethan said, "I hope I'm not overstepping, Miss Whitcomb. You seem like someone who might appreciate a bit of plain speaking." "I do," Marion said. "Go ahead." "Redstone's not an easy town, especially for women on their own, and I've seen how Crowley operates. He's not a bad man, exactly, but he's not a good one either. If you're working for him, you should watch your back." Marion glanced at him. "Why are you telling me this?" Ethan shrugged. "Because you strike me as someone who deserves a fair warning, and because—" He trailed off, looking almost embarrassed. "Because I'd like to think if I was in a new place, someone might do the same for me." They reached the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open prairie. The sky was vast and darkening, stars just beginning to appear. "I appreciate the warning," Marion said, "but I've worked for men like Crowley before. I can handle myself." "I don't doubt it," Ethan said. "You've got the look of someone who's been through some things and came out the other side." Marion smiled faintly. "That's a polite way of saying I'm old and worn out." That's not what I meant. I know. She looked out at the prairie. But it's what most people think. I'm 50, Mr. Hale. In a world that thinks women my age are only good for rocking chairs and knitting, that makes me close to useless. Anyone who thinks that is a fool, Ethan said quietly. Marian turned to him, startled. He met her gaze, steady and serious. I mean it, he said. Age doesn't make a person useless. Hell, most of the smartest people I know are older than you. They've lived through things, learned things. That's worth more than being young and pretty. Marian felt something crack open inside her chest, something she'd kept locked down for years. She looked away quickly, blinking against the sudden sting in her eyes. Thank you, she said, her voice rough. That's kind of you to say. It's true, Ethan said simply. They stood there for a moment, the wind stirring the grass around them. Then Ethan cleared his throat. I should get you back before Mrs. Talbot decides I've kidnapped you. Marian laughed, a real laugh, rusty from disuse. She probably already has. They walked back to the boarding house in comfortable silence. At the door, Ethan tipped his hat. I'll be back in a few days to pick up that order, he said. If you need anything in the meantime, if Crowley gives you trouble, you let me know. I will, Marian said. Though she doubted she'd take him up on it, she'd learned long ago not to rely on anyone but herself. Still, as she watched him walk away, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not hope, exactly, but maybe the beginning of it. The next morning, Crowley was waiting for her when she arrived at the mercantile. We need to talk, he said, his voice clipped. Marian set down her satchel. About the Brennan account? Among other things. He gestured to a chair. Sit. She didn't. I prefer to stand. His mouth thinned. Fine. Miss Whitcomb, I've reconsidered your employment here. Marian's stomach dropped, but she kept her expression neutral. I see. You're competent, Crowley continued. More than competent, actually, but you're also difficult. You ask too many questions. You challenge my decisions, and I'm starting to think this arrangement isn't working. Are you firing me? I'm suggesting we come to an understanding. He leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. I need someone to manage my books. You need a job. But if this is going to work, you need to accept that some things are none of your concern. The Brennan account, for instance, or how I choose to handle certain transactions. Your job is to record what I tell you to record, not to investigate. Marian looked at him for a long moment. She could say yes, could swallow her pride, keep her head down, take the money. It would be easier, safer. But she'd spent too many years being safe, and it had gotten her nothing but invisible. No, she said. Crowley blinked. Excuse me? I said no. I won't falsify records. I won't ignore discrepancies. And I won't pretend your books are in order when they're not. She picked up her satchel. If that's difficult for you, Mr. Crowley, then I suggest you find someone else. His face went red. You're making a mistake. Maybe, Marian said, but it's my mistake to make. She walked out of the office, through the mercantile, and into the street. Her heart was pounding, her hands shaking. She'd just walked away from the only job she had, the only income, the only reason she'd come to Redstone. She was an idiot, but she was an idiot with her integrity intact. She went back to the boarding house, paid Mrs. Talbot for the week, and started packing. She'd leave in the morning, find another town, another job. It would be fine. It always was, eventually. She was folding her last dress when someone knocked on the door. Come in, she called, expecting Mrs. Talbot. But it was Ethan Hale. He stood in the doorway looking concerned. I heard what happened. Word travels fast. Redstone's a small town. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Are you all right? I'm fine, Marian said. I've been fired before. I'll find something else. Or, Ethan said slowly, you could stay. Marian looked up. There's nothing for me here. There could be. He took off his hat, turning it in his hands. People around here need bookkeeping. Ranchers, farmers, small businesses. They just don't know how to find someone trustworthy. But if you set up your own practice, worked for yourself instead of men like Crowley, you'd have clients. I'd be your first. Marian stared at him. You're serious. Dead serious. You're good at what you do, and you've got something most people don't. You're honest. That's rare out here. I don't have money to rent an office. Use my place, Ethan said. I've got a house just outside town. It's small, but there's a room you could use. No rent. Just consider it an investment in a business partner. We're not partners. Not yet, Ethan said, smiling. But give it time. Marion sat down on the edge of the bed, her mind racing. It was a crazy idea. Risky. She didn't know Ethan well enough to trust him. Didn't know if she could make a business work on her own. But she also didn't know if she'd get another chance like this. Why are you doing this? She asked. Ethan shrugged. Because I think you're worth betting on, and because I've spent most of my life working for other people. I know what it's like to want something of your own. Marion looked at him, really looked. He wasn't handsome in any conventional way. His face was too weathered, his hands too rough. But there was something steady about him, something real. All right, she said. I'll try it. But I'm paying you back. Once I start making money, I'm paying rent. Deal, Ethan said. And just like that, Marion Whitcomb, 50 years old, widowed, alone, started building something new. Ethan's house sat 3 miles outside Redstone, a low wooden structure that looked like it had been built by someone who knew how to use their hands but didn't care much about appearances. The roof was straight, the walls were solid, but there was nothing decorative about it. No porch railing, no painted trim, just bare wood weathered gray by sun and wind. Marion stood in the doorway of what Ethan called the spare room, taking it in. A narrow bed pushed against one wall, a table that wobbled when she touched it, a single window facing west, currently covered with a flour sack nailed to the frame. I know it's not much, Ethan said from behind her, but it's dry and the roof doesn't leak. Much. Much? There's a spot in the corner that drips when it rains hard. I put a bucket there. Marion turned to look at him. He stood in the hallway, hat in hand, looking genuinely concerned that she might change her mind. It's fine, she said. And it was. She'd stayed in worse. When can I move in? Whenever you want. Today, if you're ready. She was ready. She'd been ready to leave the boarding house since the day she arrived. Mrs. Talbot's tight-lipped disapproval had worn thin fast, and the constant sense of being watched, judged, found wanting, that was something Marion had lived with long enough. I'll get my things, she said. Ethan insisted on helping, which meant he carried her satchel and the small trunk that held everything she owned while Marion walked beside him carrying her books. They made an odd pair, she thought. Him tall and sun-browned and quiet, her gray-haired and sharp-tongued and too old to be starting over. But here they were anyway. Mrs. Talbot barely looked up when Marion returned her key. Leaving already? I found other arrangements. The landlady's eyes flicked to Ethan, then back to Marion, her mouth pinched. I see. I doubt you do, Marion said evenly. But thank you for your hospitality. She walked out before Mrs. Talbot could respond. Behind her, she heard Ethan clear his throat awkwardly and mutter something about good day. On the walk back to his place, he said, She thinks we're— I know what she thinks, Marion interrupted. I don't care. It'll be all over town by tomorrow. Let it be. Marion shifted the books in her arms. I've been talked about before. It never killed me. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, For what it's worth, I'll set anyone straight who asks. Don't bother. People believe what they want to believe. They walked the rest of the way in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Ethan didn't fill space with useless chatter, and Marion appreciated that. Too many people talked just to avoid quiet, like silence was something to be feared. But Marion had spent enough time alone to know that quiet could be a relief. By the time they reached the house, the sun was starting to set. Ethan showed her where he kept the lamp oil, the matches, the pump for water. The kitchen was small and functional, a stove, a table, 2 chairs, shelves lined with tins and jars. Everything was clean but worn, used hard and often. I'm not here much, Ethan said, as if reading her thoughts. I'm on the trail most of the year. This is just where I come back to between drives. So you won't mind if I rearrange things? He smiled. Rearrange whatever you want. Make yourself at home. Home. The word felt strange. Marion hadn't had a home in years. She'd had rooms, boarding houses, temporary lodgings, but not a home, not a place that was hers. She set her books on the table and looked around. The light was fading fast, turning everything soft and golden. Through the window, she could see the prairie stretching out, endless and empty. "I'll stay out of your way," Ethan said, "and if you need anything." "I'll manage," Marion said. "But thank you." He nodded, settled his hat back on his head, and left her alone. Marion stood in the middle of the room for a long moment, listening to the silence. Then she lit the lamp, unpacked her trunk, and got to work. The next morning, she woke before dawn, dressed in her work clothes, and started setting up the spare room as an office. She dragged the bed to one side, positioned the table under the window, and used crates she found in the barn to build makeshift shelves for her ledgers and papers. It wasn't elegant, but it was functional. By the time Ethan appeared in the doorway with a cup of coffee, she'd already written out a simple sign on a piece of smooth board. M. Whitcomb, Bookkeeping and Accounts. "You work fast," he said, handing her the coffee. "I don't see the point in waiting." She took a sip. It was strong and bitter, the way she liked it. "I need to let people know I'm available for hire. Is there a place in town where I can post notices?" "General store, saloon, maybe the livery stable." He leaned against the doorframe. "But most folks around here don't read notices. You'll have better luck talking to people directly." "I'm not good at talking to people." "You talk fine when you've got something to say." Marion gave him a look. "That's different from small talk." "Then don't make small talk. Just tell them what you do and why they should hire you." He grinned. "You're good at that too." She wanted to argue, but he wasn't wrong. She'd never been shy about her skills. It was people, their expectations, their judgments, their need to put her in a box she didn't fit, that made her uncomfortable. "I'll start tomorrow," she said. "Today I need to finish setting up." Ethan nodded and left her to it. The rest of the day passed in a blur of organizing, cleaning, and planning. She made lists of potential clients, ranchers, farmers, shop owners, calculated what she'd need to charge to cover expenses and still make a profit, drafted a standard contract for her services. It felt good, purposeful, like she was building something instead of just surviving. That evening, Ethan cooked supper, fried salt pork and beans, nothing fancy but filling. They ate at the small kitchen table, the lamp flickering between them. "So," Ethan said, breaking the silence, "how'd you end up in Redstone? I know you said work, but there's work everywhere. Why here?" Marion considered not answering, but Ethan had been honest with her, had taken a risk letting her stay. He deserved something in return. "Crowley's advertisement ran in a St. Louis paper," she said. "I was staying in a boarding house there, looking for work. The ad said $30 a month plus room and board. It wasn't generous, but it was steady, and I was tired of moving." "Where were you before St. Louis?" "Topeka. Before that, Wichita. Before that," she shrugged. "Too many places to count." "You've been on the move a long time." "Since my husband died, 6 years now." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What was he like?" No one ever asked her that. Most people offered condolences and changed the subject, as if talking about the dead was impolite. But Ethan just watched her, waiting. "Robert was a clerk," Marion said slowly. "Quiet, reliable, not ambitious, but steady. We had a decent life. Not rich, but comfortable enough. Then he caught pneumonia one winter and was gone in 3 days." She stared at her plate. "He didn't leave much, some savings, the house, but the bank had a lien I didn't know about, and after the funeral expenses, there was nothing left. I had $43 and nowhere to go. No family? None that wanted me. Robert's brother offered to take me in, but only if I agreed to work as his housekeeper. Unpaid, of course. He called it charity." Her voice went flat. "I called it servitude and left." Ethan's jaw tightened. "So you've been working ever since?" "Yes, and I'm good at it. Numbers make sense to me in a way people don't. But most men don't want to hire a woman my age. They want someone young and grateful, someone who won't ask questions or challenge them." She met his eyes. "That's why Crowley hired me, I think. He thought I'd be desperate enough to overlook whatever he was doing wrong." "He thought wrong." "He did." Marion allowed herself a small smile. "And now here I am, starting a business I don't know if anyone will hire me for." "They will," Ethan said. "Give it time." She wanted to believe him, but belief required hope, and hope had disappointed her too many times. The next day, Marian walked into Redstone with her sign under her arm and her confidence carefully arranged like armor. Her first stop was the general store, not Crowley's Mercantile, but a smaller place run by a German couple named the Schneiders. Mrs. Schneider looked up from behind the counter when Marian entered. She was a solid woman with flour on her apron and suspicion in her eyes. "Help you?" "I'm Marian Whitcomb. I do bookkeeping. I wondered if I might post a notice here." Mrs. Schneider's expression didn't change. "You're the one who was working for Crowley?" "Briefly, yes." "Heard you walked out on him." News really did travel fast in this town. Marian kept her voice steady. "We had a difference of opinion about professional standards." "That's so." Mrs. Schneider wiped her hands on her apron. "What kind of bookkeeping?" "Accounts, ledgers, inventory tracking, tax preparation, whatever you need." The older woman studied her for a long moment. Then she called toward the back room. "Heinrich, come here." A tall, thin man emerged, dusting flour off his hands. He had kind eyes and the weathered face of someone who'd worked hard all his life. "This is Mrs. Whitcomb," his wife said. "She does books." Heinrich nodded. "We could use help with that. Our records are—" He gestured vaguely. "Not good." "I'd be happy to take a look," Marian said. "No charge for the first assessment. If you decide to hire me, we can discuss terms." The Schneiders exchanged a glance. Then Heinrich said, "All right, come back tomorrow. Bring your things." Just like that, she had her first client. Word spread faster than Marian expected. Within a week, she had 3 more clients: a rancher who needed help with his cattle records, a widow who ran a boarding house and couldn't make her numbers balance, and a farmer who was being audited by the territorial tax office and had no idea where half his receipts were. The work was steady, the pay was decent, and for the first time in years, Marian felt like she was building something that belonged to her. But not everyone was pleased. She was leaving the boarding house, the widow's place, not Mrs. Talbot's, when a man stepped in front of her. It was one of Crowley's clerks, a weaselly young thing named Dale. "Miss Whitcomb," he said, his tone falsely polite. "Mr. Crowley would like a word with you. Mr. Crowley can write me a letter if he has something to say. He asked me to bring you to the Mercantile." "And I'm declining." Dale's expression hardened. "He said you'd say that. He also said to remind you that he has friends in this town. Important friends." Marian stepped closer, lowering her voice. "And I have a reputation for honesty, which is worth more than any friend your employer has. Now get out of my way before I make a scene." Dale hesitated, then stepped aside. But as Marian walked past, he said, "You're making a mistake." "That seems to be my specialty," Marian replied without looking back. She told Ethan about it that evening. He was fixing the latch on the barn door, and she stood nearby, arms crossed, still angry. "Crowley's trying to intimidate you," Ethan said, not looking up from his work. "He doesn't like losing control." "I never worked for him long enough for him to have control." "Doesn't matter. You walked out, made him look bad, and now you're taking clients he probably thought would come to him." Marian frowned. "The people I'm working for aren't his customers." "No, but they're people who might have needed his help eventually. And if word gets around that you're better than him, which you are, then he loses more than clients. He loses reputation. So what do I do?" Ethan straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Keep your head down. Do good work. Let your reputation speak for itself. And if Crowley tries anything more direct, you tell me. I can handle Crowley." "I know you can." Ethan's voice was quiet but firm. "But you don't have to handle him alone." Something in his tone made Marian look at him more closely. He wasn't just being polite. He meant it. And the realization that someone actually cared what happened to her, not because they wanted something from her, but just because they did, was almost more unsettling than Crowley's threats. "Thank you," she said finally. "I'll keep that in mind." The weeks blurred together. Marian worked long hours, building her client list, earning a reputation for precision and discretion. She liked the rhythm of it, the way numbers balanced, the satisfaction of solving a problem, the quiet pride of doing something well. Ethan was gone for 10 days on a cattle drive, and Marian discovered that she missed him. Not in any dramatic way, but in small moments. The lack of coffee already made in the morning, the silence at supper, the absence of his steady presence. When he came back dusty and tired and smelling like horses, she felt something shift in her chest that she didn't quite want to examine. "How'd it go?" she asked as he unsaddled his horse. "Fine. Lost 2 head to a river crossing, but that's better than I expected." He glanced at her. "How's business?" "Good. I picked up 2 more clients while you were gone." "Told you." He grinned, and it made him look younger. "Pretty soon you'll be too successful to need this place." "I'll always need this place," Marion said before she could stop herself. Ethan went still. Then he said, softly, "Good, because I like having you here." They stood there for a moment, the horse shifting between them, the evening light turning everything gold. Then Marion cleared her throat and turned away. "I made stew," she said. "It's probably cold by now, but it's edible." Cold stew sounds perfect. That night, after supper, they sat on the front step and watched the stars come out. Ethan told her about the drive, the difficult river crossing, the spooked cattle, the young hand who'd nearly been trampled. Marion told him about her new clients, the farmer whose records were so bad she'd had to start from scratch, the widow who'd cried when Marion found an error that saved her $30. It was easy talking to Ethan. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix things, just listened. And when he did speak, it was thoughtful, measured. He didn't waste words. "Can I ask you something?" Ethan said after a long silence. "All right. Why didn't you ever remarry?" "After Robert, I mean." Marion was quiet for a moment. It was a question she'd been asked before, usually by people who thought being alone was something pitiable. But Ethan didn't sound like he pitied her. He just sounded curious. "I thought about it," she said finally, "in the first year or 2. But the men who were interested, they didn't want a partner. They wanted a housekeeper, a nurse for aging parents, someone to cook and clean and ask for nothing." She looked up at the stars. "And I realized I'd rather be alone than invisible." "You're not invisible." "I am to most people. Women my age are. We're supposed to fade into the background, be grateful for whatever scraps we're given, and not cause trouble." She glanced at him. "You're different, though. You see me." Ethan was quiet. Then he said, "My mother was 52 when my father died. Everyone told her to move in with one of us kids, let us take care of her. But she refused, bought herself a little house in town, took in sewing, lived exactly how she wanted. She was happy, I think, happier than she'd been in years." He smiled faintly. "I learned from her that being alone and being lonely aren't the same thing. She sounds like a smart woman." She was. They sat in comfortable silence after that, until the cold drove them inside. But something had shifted between them. A line had been crossed, or maybe just acknowledged. Marion felt it in the way Ethan looked at her now, in the small gestures, coffee made just how she liked it, the window in her room repaired without her asking, the way he listened when she talked about her work like it mattered. And she felt it in herself too. The way her heart lifted when she heard his horse coming up the road. The way she caught herself smoothing her hair before he came inside. The way she'd started thinking about him when she should have been thinking about ledgers. It scared her. She'd spent years building walls to protect herself, and Ethan was dismantling them without even trying. One evening, about a month after she'd moved in, Marion was working late when Ethan knocked on her open door. "You're going to ruin your eyes reading by lamplight," he said. "My eyes were ruined years ago." She didn't look up from the ledger. "What is it?" "There's a barn dance in town this Saturday. I thought, if you weren't too busy, maybe you'd want to go." Marion's pen stopped moving. She looked up. Ethan stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking nervous. "A dance," she repeated. "Yeah, it's nothing fancy. Just people gathering, some music, food. I go most years." He shifted his weight. "But it's more fun with company." "I don't dance." "Neither do I, really. But we could stand around and watch other people make fools of themselves." Despite herself, Marion smiled. "That does sound appealing." "So you'll come?" She should say no. Should keep the boundaries clear, keep things professional. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was, "All right, I'll come." Ethan's whole face lit up. "Good. I'll let you get back to work." He left, and Marion sat there staring at the ledger without seeing it. What was she doing? She was 50 years old, too old for dances and courting and whatever foolishness she was entertaining. But then again, maybe that was exactly the point. She'd spent so long being sensible, being careful, being what other people expected. Maybe it was time to be foolish. Saturday arrived cold and clear. Marian dressed carefully, not her work dress, but the nicer one she saved for special occasions. It was dark blue wool, well made but years old. She pinned her hair up, checked her reflection in the small mirror, and tried not to feel ridiculous. Ethan was waiting by the wagon, wearing clean trousers and a shirt that looked freshly pressed. He'd even shaved. "You look nice," he said when she came out. "So do you." They rode into town as the sun was setting, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. The barn was already full of people, farmers and ranchers and townspeople, children running between the adults, music spilling out into the evening air. Marian hesitated at the entrance. She could feel people looking at her, whispering. The widow who'd walked out on Crowley. The woman living with Ethan Hale. The one who thought she was too good for honest work. Ethan must have sensed her tension because he leaned close and said quietly, "Ignore them. You have every right to be here." "Do I?" "You do." He offered his arm. "Come on, let's get some of that apple cider before it's all gone." They made their way through the crowd. Some people nodded politely. Others turned away. But Ethan stayed close, steady as always, and gradually Marian felt herself relax. The music was lively, a fiddle and a guitar, and someone on a makeshift drum. Couples spun across the floor, laughing and sweating. Children darted between them. Old women sat in chairs along the wall, gossiping and keeping watch. Marian and Ethan found a spot near the edge and watched. The cider was sweet and cold, the air warm with bodies and lantern light. It wasn't elegant or refined, but it was real, honest. "Having fun?" Ethan asked after a while. "I am, actually." "Good." He hesitated, then said, "Would you want to dance? Just one. I promise I won't step on your feet more than twice." Marian laughed. "I'll hold you to that." He led her onto the floor just as the music shifted to something slower. His hand settled on her waist, careful and respectful. Her hand rested on his shoulder. They moved together, awkward at first, then finding a rhythm. "See?" Ethan said. "Not so bad? You've already stepped on my foot once." "That was an accident." "Mm-hmm." He grinned, and Marian felt something warm spread through her chest. This man, this kind, steady, patient man, was looking at her like she mattered, like she was worth dancing with, worth spending time with, worth knowing. And maybe, she thought, she could let herself believe it. The music ended too soon. They stepped apart, both a little breathless. Ethan opened his mouth to say something, but before he could, a voice cut through the noise. "Well, well, Marian Whitcomb, out dancing. I didn't think you had it in you." Marian turned. Silas Crowley stood a few feet away, a drink in his hand and a smirk on his face. Dale was beside him, along with two other men she didn't recognize. "Mr. Crowley," Marian said evenly, "enjoying the evening?" "I was, until I saw you here, playing at respectability." His eyes flicked to Ethan. "Living with a man outside of marriage, taking clients that should be mine. Tell me, Miss Whitcomb, is this how you conduct business? On your back?" The barn went quiet. People stopped dancing, stopped talking. Everyone was watching. Marian's face went hot, but her voice stayed cold. "You should be careful what you say, Mr. Crowley. Slander is a serious accusation." "Is it slander if it's true?" Ethan stepped forward, his expression dangerous. "You need to apologize, right now." "Or what? You'll defend her honor?" Crowley laughed. "She doesn't have any honor left to defend." What happened next happened fast. Ethan's fist connected with Crowley's jaw with a sound like a hammer hitting wood. Crowley went down hard, his drink flying. Dale and the other men lunged forward, and suddenly the whole thing turned into a brawl. Fists flying, people shouting, women shrieking. Marian stood frozen for half a second. Then she grabbed Ethan's arm and pulled. "We're leaving, now." He hesitated, breathing hard, his knuckles already swelling. Then he nodded and let her lead him out. They didn't speak until they were in the wagon, heading away from town. Marian's hands were shaking. Ethan's jaw was tight. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I shouldn't have hit him." "No, you shouldn't have." Marian stared straight ahead. "But thank you anyway." "For what? Making everything worse?" "For standing up for me. No one's done that in a long time." Ethan was quiet. Then he said, "He had no right to talk to you that way. Men like Crowley think they have every right." She took a breath. "This is going to cause problems. You know that." "I know." "He'll spread rumors, try to ruin my business, maybe yours too." "Let him try." Marian looked at him. His profile was hard in the moonlight, his jaw set, and she realized something that both terrified and thrilled her. She was falling in love with him, not the desperate, all-consuming love of youth, but something deeper, steadier, the kind of love that came from respect, from shared silence, from seeing someone clearly and choosing them anyway. And she had no idea what to do about it. They didn't speak for the rest of the ride home. The wagon wheels creaked over the rutted road, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. Marian kept her hands folded in her lap, trying to stop them from shaking. She'd been humiliated before, plenty of times, but never quite like that. Never in front of a whole town, with everyone watching, judging. When they reached the house, Ethan helped her down from the wagon without a word. His knuckles were split and bleeding. She caught his hand before he could pull away. "Let me clean that," she said. "It's nothing. It's not nothing. Come inside." She led him to the kitchen, lit the lamp, and pumped water into a basin. Ethan sat at the table while she gathered clean cloth and the bottle of whiskey he kept in the cupboard for occasions like this. "This is going to sting," she warned. "I've had worse." She poured whiskey over his knuckles. He hissed through his teeth but didn't pull away. The cuts were deep but clean. She worked carefully, dabbing away the blood, wrapping his hand in strips of cloth. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "Hit him, I mean." "Yes, I did." "No, you could have walked away. Should have walked away." Ethan met her eyes. "He called you a whore, Marian. In front of everyone. I wasn't going to stand there and let him. And now he'll use this against you, against both of us." "I don't care." "You should care." Her voice cracked despite her best efforts. "You have a business, a reputation. I won't be the reason you lose that." Ethan reached up with his good hand and caught hers. "You're not the reason for anything. Crowley is. He's the one spreading lies because he's angry you wouldn't bend to him. That's on him, not you." "People won't see it that way." "Then people are fools." Marian pulled her hand free and turned away. She couldn't look at him, not when her chest felt tight and her eyes were burning. "You should have let me handle it," she said. "How? By standing there and taking it?" "Yes, I've been doing that my whole life. I know how." "Well, maybe it's time you didn't have to." The words hung between them. Marian gripped the edge of the table, fighting for control. She'd learned young that crying solved nothing. Tears were weakness, and weakness got you nowhere. But right now, she felt dangerously close to breaking. "I should go to bed," she said, her voice barely steady. "It's late." "Marian." "Good night, Ethan." She left before he could say anything else. In her room, she closed the door, leaned against it, and finally let herself cry. Not loud, ugly sobs. She'd never allowed herself that, but quiet tears that slid down her face and dripped onto her collar. She'd thought she could build something here, thought she could make a life that was hers, independent and clean. But Crowley had just proven what she'd always known. Women like her didn't get to have nice things, didn't get to have respect or safety or love. Love. The word stuck in her mind like a burr. She wasn't supposed to be thinking about love. She was supposed to be sensible, practical. But she couldn't stop thinking about the way Ethan had looked at Crowley, the fury in his eyes, the way he'd stepped between her and danger without hesitation. No one had ever done that for her before, and it terrified her. The next morning, Marian woke early and found Ethan already in the kitchen. He'd made coffee, and his hand was still wrapped in the bandages she'd put on the night before. "How is it?" she asked. "Sore, but I'll live." He poured her a cup. "Listen, about last night. We don't need to talk about it." "I think we do." Marian sat down, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. Outside, the sky was just beginning to lighten, turning the world gray and soft. "What Crowley said," Ethan continued, "it's going to spread. You know that." "I know. And it's going to make things harder for you, for your business." "Probably." "So what are you going to do?" Marian looked at him. "What can I do? I can't stop people from talking. I can't force them to believe the truth. All I can do is keep working, keep my head up, and prove them wrong." And if they don't hire you because of the rumors, then I'll find other work. I always do. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You could marry me." Marian's cup stopped halfway to her mouth. "What? If we were married, the rumors would stop. People couldn't say anything about you living here, and it would legitimize everything." He spoke quickly, like he was afraid he'd lose his nerve. "I know it's not romantic. I know it's practical. But it would solve the problem." Marian set her cup down carefully. "You want to marry me to solve a problem?" "No, I mean—" Ethan ran his good hand through his hair. "That came out wrong. I'm saying it wrong." "Then say it right." He looked at her and something in his expression shifted. The nervousness fell away, leaving only honesty. "I want to marry you because I care about you," he said. "Because you're the smartest, toughest person I've ever met. Because I like having you here, like coming home and knowing you'll be waiting. Because when I'm on the trail, I think about getting back to you." He took a breath. "And yes, because marrying you would protect you from people like Crowley, but mostly because I don't want to imagine my life without you in it anymore." Marian sat very still. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "I'm 50 years old," she said finally. "I know. I can't give you children. I don't want children. I want you. I'm difficult, opinionated. I won't be a good wife in the traditional sense. I won't cook fancy meals or host parties or any of that." "Good. I hate parties." Despite everything, Marian felt her mouth twitch. "This is insane." "Maybe." Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. "But is it a yes?" She looked down at their joined hands. His was rough and scarred, the bandage already coming loose. Hers was ink-stained and wrinkled. They weren't young or beautiful or anything like what people expected, but they fit. "I need time to think," she said. "Take all the time you need." But even as she said it, Marian knew what her answer would be. 3 days later, Crowley made his move. Marian was working at the Schneider's store when Dale walked in with 2 other men. They looked official, dark suits, serious expressions. "Miss Whitcomb," Dale said, "these men are from the Territorial Tax Office. They have some questions about your business practices." Marian looked up from the ledger. "What kind of questions?" One of the men stepped forward. He had a narrow face and cold eyes. "We've received a complaint that you've been operating a business without proper licensing. Also, allegations of fraud and improper accounting practices." "That's ridiculous," Mrs. Schneider said. "She's been nothing but honest with us." "Nevertheless, we need to investigate." The man pulled out a paper. "We'll need to examine all your records, Miss Whitcomb. Client lists, contracts, ledgers, everything." Marian's stomach dropped. She knew exactly what this was. Crowley, using his connections to harass her. The tax men probably didn't even know they were being used. "I keep my records at my residence," she said calmly. "You're welcome to examine them, but I warn you, you won't find anything improper." "We'll be the judge of that. Where's this residence?" 3 miles east, the Hale property." The narrow-faced man's eyebrows went up. "You're living on Ethan Hale's land?" "I am." "Unmarried." And there it was, the real knife. Marian felt her face flush, but she kept her voice level. "My living arrangements are none of your concern. You're here about business licensing, not my personal life." "Actually," the man said, pulling out another paper, "we're also investigating a complaint that you've been operating an illegal boarding arrangement without proper permits." "I'm not running a boarding house. I'm renting a room from an unmarried man, which, according to territorial law, constitutes either a boarding arrangement or something else entirely." The implication hung in the air. Mrs. Schneider gasped. Dale smirked. Marian stood up slowly. "I see. So this has nothing to do with my business practices and everything to do with harassment. We're just following up on legitimate complaints, ma'am." "Complaints filed by Silas Crowley, I assume?" The man's expression didn't change. "We can't disclose the source of complaints. Now, are you going to cooperate with this investigation or not?" Marian wanted to tell him to go to hell, wanted to throw them all out and slam the door. But that would only make things worse. "Fine," she said. "I'll take you to my records, but I'm notifying Mr. Hale first. It's his property, and he has a right to know who's coming onto it." She gathered her things, nodded to the worried-looking Schneiders, and led the taxmen outside. Dale followed, looking entirely too pleased with himself. The ride out to the house was tense and silent. Marion's mind raced. They could shut down her business, could force her to leave, could ruin everything she'd built. Unless she married Ethan. The thought made her angry. She didn't want to marry him because she had to. Didn't want her choice to be dictated by men like Crowley and their petty vindictiveness. But maybe that was pride talking. Maybe the smart thing was to accept the protection marriage would give her and stop pretending she could do everything alone. When they reached the house, Ethan was in the barn. He came out when he heard the wagon, took one look at the taxmen, and his expression went hard. "What's going on?" "These men are from the Territorial Tax Office," Marion said. "They want to examine my business records." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "On whose authority?" The narrow-faced man bristled. "On the authority of the territorial government. We have a right to investigate any business operating in this jurisdiction. And I have a right to know who's making complaints about people on my property. We can't disclose that information." "Then you can leave. Mr. Hale, if you interfere with an official investigation, I'm not interfering. I'm exercising my property rights. You want to look at Miss Whitcomb's records, you get a warrant. Until then, you're trespassing." The taxmen exchanged glances. Dale shifted uncomfortably. "This isn't over," the narrow-faced man said. "We'll be back with proper documentation." "Looking forward to it," Ethan said flatly. They left, Dale looking back over his shoulder with a scowl. When they were gone, Ethan turned to Marion. "Are you all right?" "No," she said, "but I will be." They went inside. Marion sat at the kitchen table and told him everything, the accusations, the implications, the threat to shut down her business. "It's Crowley," Ethan said when she finished. "He's trying to force you out." "I know." "So what do we do?" Marion looked at him, at this man who'd given her space, respected her work, defended her honor. This man who'd proposed marriage not because he needed a wife, but because he wanted her. "We get married," she said. Ethan went still. "You're sure?" "I'm not sure of anything, but I'm tired of running, tired of letting men like Crowley dictate my life." She stood up. "If I marry you, he loses his leverage. The taxmen have no grounds for investigation, and I can keep my business." "That's not why I want to marry you." "I know, but it's a good reason anyway." Ethan crossed the room and took her hands. "I need you to be sure, Marion. Not because it's practical or strategic, but because you want this." Did she want this? Marion looked at their joined hands, thought about the past months, the quiet mornings, the easy conversations, the way her chest felt lighter when he was near. Yes, she wanted this. "I want this," she said, "not because I have to, because I choose to." Ethan's whole face softened. "Then let's do it. We'll get married tomorrow if you want." "Tomorrow might be too fast." "Next week then, or whenever you're ready." Marion took a breath. "Next week. That'll give me time to finish up with my current clients and make arrangements. And it'll give me time to fix up the house properly, make it actually fit for two people. It's already fit for two people. It's fit for one cowboy and his visiting bookkeeper. I want it to be fit for my wife." "My wife?" The words sent a strange thrill through Marion's chest. She was going to be someone's wife again, not because she needed protection or money, but because two people had chosen each other. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down. It felt like jumping. Over the next few days, word spread. Marion and Ethan were getting married. Reactions were mixed. Some people were pleased. The Schneiders, the widow who ran the boarding house where Marion did books, a few others. Some were skeptical. Many were quietly disapproving. Mrs. Talbot actually stopped Marion on the street. "I hope you know what you're doing," she said, her voice dripping with concern that sounded more like judgment. "Marrying a man to save your reputation is a desperate move." "I'm not marrying him to save my reputation," Marion said. "I'm marrying him because I want to." "At your age? Really?" "Especially at my age." Mrs. Talbot sniffed and walked away. Marion watched her go and felt nothing but relief that she'd never have to see the inside of that woman's boarding house again. Crowley, predictably, didn't take the news well. He showed up at the house 3 days before the wedding, his face red with anger. "You think this solves anything?" he shouted at Marion. Ethan was in town getting supplies, so it was just the two of them. "You think marrying him makes you respectable?" "I think it's none of your business," Marion said. She was in the garden, pulling weeds, and she didn't stop working. You cost me business, cost me reputation. You did that to yourself when you kept dishonest books. I could ruin you, could tell everyone what you really are. Marian stood up, brushing dirt from her hands. And what am I, Mr. Crowley? A widow who refused to be controlled? A woman who wouldn't look the other way while you cheated your customers? Go ahead, tell everyone. See if they believe you. They will. Because you're nothing. Just an old woman pretending to be more than she is. That one hit closer than Marian wanted to admit, but she'd spent too long letting other people's words wound her. I may be old, she said quietly, but I'm not nothing. And I never pretended to be anything other than what I am, someone who knows her worth and won't settle for less than she deserves. She met his eyes. You should try it sometime. Crowley's jaw worked like he wanted to say something else, but then he just turned and left, his boots crunching on the gravel. Marian went back to her weeding. Her hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from anger, from the sheer exhaustion of constantly having to defend her existence. When Ethan came home and found her still in the garden, he sat down beside her without a word. They pulled weeds together in silence until the sun started to set. Crowley was here, Marian said finally. I figured, you've got that look. What look? The one you get when you've been fighting and won, but you're too tired to celebrate. Marian smiled despite herself. That's depressingly accurate. What did he say? The usual, that I'm nothing, that marrying you won't change anything. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Do you believe him? No, but it still hurts to hear. I know. He reached over and took her hand. For what it's worth, I think you're everything, and marrying you is the smartest thing I'll ever do. Marian's throat tightened. You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it because I have to. I'm saying it because it's true. She looked at him, really looked. At the lines around his eyes, the gray in his hair, the calluses on his hands. He wasn't perfect. He was stubborn and quiet, and sometimes too quick to use his fists. But he was good, honest, and he saw her as she was and didn't want her to be anything else. I love you, she said. The words came out rough, unpracticed. She hadn't said them in years, hadn't let herself feel them. Ethan's expression went soft. I love you too. They sat there in the dirt, holding hands, watching the sky turn purple and gold. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Marian felt something close to peace. The wedding was small. They went to the justice of the peace in town, a gruff old man named Hutchins, who'd seen everything and was impressed by nothing. The Schneiders came as witnesses. So did the widow who ran the other boarding house, and a rancher named Tom who'd hired Marian to sort out his cattle records. Marian wore her best dress, the dark blue wool. Ethan wore a clean shirt and actually combed his hair. They stood in Hutchins' small office while he read from a book in a monotone voice, stumbling over the words like he'd rather be anywhere else. Do you, Ethan Hale, take this woman? I do, Ethan said before Hutchins could finish. I wasn't done yet. I know, but yes, I do. Hutchins sighed. And do you, Marian Whitcomb, take this man? Yes, Marian said, I do. You too? Fine. By the power vested in me by the territory of Kansas, I pronounce you married. Kiss her or don't, I don't care. Sign the register. They signed. Mrs. Schneider cried a little. Tom clapped Ethan on the back. And just like that, Marian was married again. It didn't feel real until they were back at the house, their house now, and Ethan carried her bags into his room. You don't have to use the spare room anymore, he said, unless you want to. Marian looked at the room. It was bigger than hers, with a real bed and a window that faced east. She could see the prairie stretching out, endless and free. I'll stay here, she said. That night, they lay in bed together for the first time. Not touching, just existing in the same space. The unfamiliarity of it was strange, but not uncomfortable. Are you all right? Ethan asked in the darkness. I think so. Are you? Yeah, just trying to believe this is real. Me too. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window. Winter was coming. Marian could feel it in the air, in the cold creeping through the walls. Ethan? Thank you for all of this. He rolled toward her. She felt his hand find hers under the blanket. You don't have to thank me. This isn't charity, Marion. This is us choosing each other. I know, but still. Thank you. He squeezed her hand, and slowly, carefully, they learned how to sleep next to each other. Two people who'd been alone for so long they'd forgotten what closeness felt like. The next morning, Marion woke to find snow falling. Not much, just a dusting, but enough to turn the world white and quiet. Ethan was already up, making coffee. She joined him in the kitchen, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. He handed her a cup without speaking, and they stood at the window watching the snow together. It'll be a hard winter, Ethan said. I know. You sure you want to stay out here? We could find a place in town, somewhere warmer. Marion looked at the prairie, at the endless white. I'm sure. This is home now. And it was. Not because it was comfortable or easy, but because it was theirs. Because they'd chosen it, and each other, and were building something that belonged to them alone. The storm hit 2 weeks later. It started as a light snow that turned into a blizzard overnight. Wind screamed around the house, piling snow against the walls, making the windows shake. Marion and Ethan huddled near the stove, burning through their wood supply faster than they'd planned. By the second day, the drifts were high enough that they couldn't see out the windows. The cold seeped through every crack, and no matter how many blankets they piled on, it wasn't enough. We need to conserve heat, Ethan said. Stay in one room. Keep the stove going, but not too high. They moved everything into the bedroom. Food, water, extra wood. They hung blankets over the door to keep the heat in. And they waited. On the third night, when the wind was so loud it sounded like the house might come apart, Marion lay next to Ethan under every blanket they owned and felt something break open inside her. I'm scared, she said. Ethan pulled her closer. Of the storm? Of all of it. Of losing this. Of losing you. You're not going to lose me. You don't know that. Robert died in 3 days. Everything I had, gone. I can't. Her voice cracked. I can't go through that again. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I can't promise I won't die. None of us can. But I can promise that while I'm here, I'm yours, completely. And whatever happens, we'll face it together. Marion turned toward him in the darkness. She couldn't see his face, but she could feel his warmth, hear his breathing. I never thought I'd have this again, she said. Love, partnership, someone who sees me. I see you, all of you, and I'm not going anywhere. She kissed him then, not tentatively or carefully, but with all the feelings she'd been holding back. And he kissed her back, and in that small room with the storm raging outside, they found each other completely. Later, as they lay tangled together, Marion felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the fragile, desperate kind that shattered at the first disappointment, but the solid, enduring kind that came from knowing you weren't alone anymore. The storm lasted 5 days. When it finally cleared, they dug themselves out and surveyed the damage. Fences down, barn roof partially collapsed, but the house stood, and they were alive. We've got work to do, Ethan said, looking at the destruction. We do, Marion agreed, and they got to it, together. Spring came late that year, and when it finally arrived, it brought mud thick enough to swallow a wagon wheel and rain that turned every job into a battle against the elements. Marion stood in what would become her proper office and watched Ethan and Tom wrestle a beam into place. They were adding onto the house. 2 rooms, one for her work and one for storage. It was Ethan's idea, though he'd presented it like it was hers. You need a real office, he'd said one morning over coffee. Not that room with the wobbly table. Something proper, with shelves and a good desk and a door you can close when clients get too chatty. That costs money we don't have, Marion had replied. We have enough, and Tom owes me a favor. He'll help with the labor. So here they were, 2 months later, building something permanent. The walls were up, the roof was half finished, and Marion was trying not to think about how much lumber cost or how they'd pay for glass windows. You're doing it again, Ethan called from where he stood on the roof. Doing what? Worrying. I can see it from up here. I'm not worrying. I'm calculating. Same thing with you. Tom laughed, hammer in hand. She's got you figured out, Hale. She does, Ethan agreed, grinning down at her. Married 3 months, and she already knows all my tells. Marian felt heat creep into her face. Marriage still felt strange sometimes. Good strange, but strange. She'd catch herself thinking of Ethan as her husband, and the word would stick in her throat like something she wasn't allowed to claim. But he was her husband, and she was his wife. And they were building a life that felt more solid than anything she'd had before. The office was finished by early May. Ethan built her a desk from oak, solid and level, with drawers that actually slid smooth. Tom's wife donated an old chair that needed new upholstery, and Marian spent 2 evenings repairing it until it was serviceable. The shelves went up last, and Marian arranged her ledgers and books with the same care some women used arranging china. "It's perfect," she said when it was done. Ethan leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, looking pleased. "You think clients will come all the way out here?" "If they want good work, they will." And they did. By summer, Marian had more clients than she could handle alone. Ranchers, farmers, 3 different merchants in town who weren't Crowley, even a lawyer from 2 towns over who'd heard about her and needed help organizing estate records. The money was good. Better than good. For the first time in her life, Marian had savings. Actual money set aside, not for emergencies or survival, but for the future. It felt dangerous, having something to lose. One afternoon in late June, she was working through a particularly tangled set of accounts when someone knocked. She looked up to find a young woman standing in the doorway, maybe 25, thin and nervous looking, with a baby on her hip. "Mrs. Hale?" the woman said. "Yes." Marian still wasn't used to the name. "Can I help you?" "I'm Sarah Mitchell. My husband farms about 10 miles west. I heard you do bookkeeping." "I do." "Come in. Sit down." Sarah sat, bouncing the baby absently. "I don't know if you take on small jobs, but we're in trouble. The bank says we owe more than Thomas thought, and the numbers don't make sense. He's talking about selling the farm, and Her voice cracked. "I don't know where else to go." Marian recognized that desperation. She'd lived it. "Let me see what you have," she said gently. Sarah pulled out a stack of papers, loan documents, payment receipts, correspondence from the bank. Marian spread them across her desk and started reading. It took less than 10 minutes to find the problem. "Your husband's been paying the wrong amount," she said. "The bank changed the terms 3 months ago and didn't notify you properly. You've been underpaying and they've been adding penalties." Sarah's face went white. "So we do owe it?" "You owe some of it, but not all. These penalty fees are excessive, and I'd bet money the bank knows it." Marian pulled out a clean sheet of paper. "I'm going to write you a letter. You take this to the bank and show them exactly where their accounting is wrong. If they push back, you tell them you'll file a complaint with the Territorial Banking Commission." "Will that work?" "It should. Banks don't like scrutiny." Marian finished the letter and handed it over. "And if it doesn't work, you come back to me. I'll go with you." Sarah stared at the letter, then at Marian. "How much do I owe you?" "Nothing for this. It took me 10 minutes. But if it saves your farm, that's payment enough." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She stood, clutching the letter like it was made of gold. "Thank you. Thank you." After she left, Marian sat at her desk feeling strangely unsteady. She'd just given away work she could have charged for. Robert would have called that poor business sense. But Marian didn't care. Sometimes doing the right thing mattered more than making money. That evening, she told Ethan about it while they worked in the garden. He was pulling weeds and she was checking the bean plants for pests. "You think the bank will back down?" he asked. "They will, if they're smart. The letter makes it clear I know what I'm talking about. And if they're not smart, then I'll handle it." Marian straightened, pressing a hand to her lower back. "I'm tired of watching people get taken advantage of just because they don't understand numbers." Ethan smiled. "You're building yourself a reputation." "For what? Being difficult?" "For being honest. For giving a damn." He reached over and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "People notice that." 2 weeks later, Sarah came back. The bank had backed down, reduced the debt by half, and restructured the payments. She brought Marian a basket of eggs and a jar of preserves and cried again. "You saved our farm," she said. "I just showed them their mistake," Marian replied. But inside she felt something warm and bright. Pride, maybe. Or purpose. Word spread. More women started coming to her, wives whose husbands had died and left them with tangled finances, widows trying to navigate inheritance, daughters trying to understand why their father's businesses were failing. Marion helped them all. She charged the ones who could afford it and worked for free for the ones who couldn't. Ethan never complained about the reduced income. If anything, he seemed proud. "You're doing good work," he said one night. They were sitting on the new porch he'd built, watching the sunset. "Important work. It's just bookkeeping." "It's more than that. You're teaching them they don't have to accept what men tell them, that they can understand money and business and contracts. That's power, Marion." She looked at him. "You don't mind that I'm not bringing in as much money? We're doing fine. And even if we weren't, I'd rather have a wife who does work that matters than one who just chases profit." He took her hand. "Besides, watching you tear apart bad accounting is the most entertainment I get these days." Marion laughed. "You're easily entertained. I'm married to you. How could I be bored?" By August, the taxmen came back. Same narrow-faced official, different paperwork. They'd gotten their warrant, and they wanted to examine Marion's records. She'd let them in, showed them to her office, and watched them spend 6 hours going through every ledger and contract. She didn't hover or interfere, just sat at her desk and kept working on other accounts. When they finished, the narrow-faced man looked frustrated. "Everything appears to be in order," he said, like the words tasted bad. "Of course it is. I told you it would be. We'll need to verify a few things with some of your clients. Feel free. They'll tell you the same thing." The men left, and Marion went back to work. But her hands were shaking. She'd known the records were clean, but having them examined felt invasive, like being stripped naked and judged. That night, she told Ethan she wanted to fight back. "Against who?" he asked. "Crowley, the tax office. All of it. I'm tired of being defensive, tired of proving I have a right to exist." "What did you have in mind?" Marion pulled out a stack of papers she'd been collecting. "I've been tracking Crowley's business practices. The underreporting, the overcharging, the questionable accounts. I have enough evidence to file a formal complaint." Ethan whistled low. "That'll start a war." "We're already at war. He just hasn't admitted it yet. And if you file this complaint, what happens? Either the territorial authorities investigate and find what I found, or they don't. Either way, Crowley knows I'm not backing down." Ethan studied her. "You're sure about this?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." He grinned. "That's my wife." Marion filed the complaint in September. Within a week, Crowley showed up at the house angrier than she'd ever seen him. "You've gone too far," he snarled. He'd pushed past Ethan and cornered Marion in her office. "Filing false complaints? Trying to destroy my business? The complaints aren't false. Your books are a mess, and you know it. You have no proof. I have plenty of proof. I worked for you, remember? I saw everything." Crowley stepped closer. "You're making a mistake, a big one. Then I'll live with it." "You won't live with anything if I have my way. I'll see you run out of this territory. You and your husband both." Ethan appeared in the doorway, and his expression was dangerous. "Time for you to leave, Crowley." "Or what? You'll hit me again?" "If I have to." For a moment, Marion thought Crowley might actually throw a punch, but then he seemed to think better of it. He turned and left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Marion sat down, suddenly exhausted. "That went well." "He's scared," Ethan said. "Scared men are dangerous." "I know. So we need to be careful." But being careful didn't stop what came next. 3 nights later, Marion woke to the smell of smoke. She sat up, confused, and saw orange light flickering through the window. Ethan was already out of bed, pulling on his boots. "Fire," he said. "The barn." They ran outside. The barn was fully engulfed, flames reaching into the night sky. Ethan grabbed buckets, started hauling water from the pump, but it was already too late. The structure was old, dry wood, and it burned like kindling. They saved the horses, got them out choking and terrified but alive. Everything else burned. Tools, feed, the winter hay supply. All of it gone. By dawn, only the stone foundation remained, smoking and black. Marion stood looking at the destruction, her nightgown soaked from pump water, her face smudged with soot. "This was deliberate," she said. "Probably." "Crowley." "Probably," Ethan said again. He looked tired and angry and older than he had yesterday. But we can't prove it. So he just gets away with it? For now. Marion wanted to scream, wanted to march into town and tear Crowley apart with her bare hands. But that wouldn't rebuild the barn or replace what they'd lost. How much will it cost to rebuild? She asked. Ethan rubbed his face. More than we have, even with your savings. Then we borrow. Banks won't lend to us. Not with a complaint filed against one of their biggest customers. Marion's stomach sank. So what do we do? We rebuild anyway. Slower, maybe. With help from people who owe us favors. He turned to her. Unless you want to drop the complaint, make peace with Crowley. No. Marion, no. I won't give him that satisfaction. Won't let him think he can burn me out and I'll just fold. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right. Then we do it the hard way. The hard way meant months of work. Tom came out most weekends to help. The Schneiders sent lumber at a discount. Sarah Mitchell's husband donated labor. Slowly, the barn started to rise again, smaller than before, but solid. Marion kept working, kept taking clients, kept building her reputation. She also started writing articles for a territorial newspaper about women's property rights and financial literacy. The editor was a widow herself and printed everything Marion sent. The articles made waves. Women started writing to her from other towns, asking for advice. A few even traveled to see her in person. Marion found herself not just doing bookkeeping, but teaching, explaining, empowering. You're becoming famous, Ethan said one evening, reading one of her articles. I'm becoming notorious. There's a difference. Either way, people are paying attention. And they were. By the time winter came again, Marion had clients in 5 different towns. She'd helped 3 women file for divorce based on financial abuse. She'd testified in 2 court cases about fraudulent accounting. And she'd become someone people talked about, either with admiration or disgust, depending on their opinion of women who didn't know their place. Crowley's complaint against her was eventually dismissed. Lack of evidence, the officials said. But Marion's complaint against him went forward. The investigation found irregularities, and while Crowley wasn't shut down, he was fined and forced to pay back several customers. It wasn't total victory, but it was enough. One cold December evening, Marion was finishing up work when Ethan came into her office and sat down across from her. I've been thinking, he said. About? About building a bigger house, adding more rooms. Marion looked up. We just rebuilt the barn. We can't afford... I'm not talking about now. I'm talking about next year, maybe the year after. But I want to plan for it. He leaned forward. I want to build you a house that's yours, Marion. Not just a place you're living in. Something you designed that fits how you work, how you live. With an office big enough for all the work you're doing. Maybe even space for women to come stay if they need to. A safe place. Marion's throat went tight. That's a big dream. So, we've managed everything else. She thought about the past year. The barn burning, the investigation, the slow, hard work of rebuilding. They'd survived all of it. All right, she said. Let's plan for it. They spent the winter sketching out ideas. A house with windows facing east, so Marion could watch the sunrise while she worked. Multiple rooms, including one that could serve as a library or meeting space. A proper kitchen with a good stove. Ethan wanted a porch that wrapped around the whole front. So we can sit and watch storms come in, he said. You just want an excuse to sit around, Marion teased. Can you blame me? I'm getting old. You're 42. Exactly. Ancient. She threw a pencil at him. He caught it and grinned. They were happy. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but genuinely happy. And that scared Marion sometimes. The fear that it would be taken away. That she didn't deserve it. That she was too old for this kind of contentment. But Ethan had a way of pulling her out of those dark thoughts. Stop borrowing trouble, he'd say. We're here now. That's what matters. And he was right. They were here. Together. Building something that was theirs. By spring, they'd saved enough to start on the foundation. Tom brought his crew out, and they broke ground on a warm March day. Marion stood watching the first post go in and felt something she hadn't felt since she was young. Excitement. Pure, uncomplicated excitement about the future. The house took shape over the summer. Walls went up, the roof went on, windows were installed. Marion insisted on glass in every room, even though it cost more. She wanted light, wanted to see the prairie, the sky, the world she'd claimed as her own. Ethan built her office first, making sure it was finished before anything else. It was twice the size of her old one, with built-in shelves and a massive desk and a door that locked from the inside. "So clients can't barge in," he explained. "And so you can't interrupt me," she added. "That too." They moved in by October, though the house wasn't completely finished. There were still rooms without furniture, walls that needed paint, 100 small details left undone. But it was theirs, a home they'd built together, designed for the life they were living. The first night in the new house, they lay in bed in the master bedroom, the one Marian had insisted on putting in the corner with windows on 2 walls, and listened to the silence. "It's strange," Marian said, "being somewhere this new." "Good strange?" "Yeah, good strange." Ethan pulled her closer. "I'm proud of you. You know that?" "For what?" "For everything. For building this business, for standing up to Crowley, for not giving up when things got hard." He kissed her forehead. "For choosing me." Marian felt tears prick her eyes. "I didn't have much choice. You were the only one crazy enough to want me." "I'm not crazy. I'm smart. I saw what you were before you saw it yourself." "And what's that?" "Someone extraordinary." Marian turned in his arms, looked at his face in the moonlight. "I love you," she said, "more than I thought I could love anyone." "I love you too." They made love that night with the windows open, the prairie wind blowing through, carrying the scent of grass and earth. And afterward, lying tangled together, Marian thought about how far she'd come. From that boarding house in St. Louis, desperate and nearly broken, to here. To a home she owned, work she was proud of, a man who loved her for exactly who she was. She'd thought her life was over at 50, thought the best years were behind her. She'd been wrong. The best years were just beginning. Over the next few months, the house became a gathering place. Women came not just for bookkeeping help, but for advice, for support, for a place where they could speak freely without judgment. Marian started hosting meetings once a month, informal gatherings where women talked about business, property rights, how to protect themselves financially. Some people in town called it scandalous. A women's group, meeting without men present, talking about money and power. But Marian didn't care. The women needed it, and she had the space to provide it. Ethan supported it fully. He'd make himself scarce on meeting nights, going into town or working in the barn, giving the women privacy. "You're changing things," he told her one night after a particularly well-attended meeting. "You know that?" "I'm just helping people understand their rights." "You're doing more than that. You're showing them they don't have to accept the world as it is, that they can demand better." Marian thought about that. About Sarah Mitchell, who'd gone on to start her own business selling preserves. About the widow who'd used Marian's advice to successfully fight for her late husband's pension. About the young woman who'd filed for divorce and was now managing her own farm. Maybe Ethan was right. Maybe she was changing things. Not the whole world, not overnight, but one woman at a time, one ledger at a time, one act of courage at a time. And that felt like enough. Winter came again, harder than the one before, but this time they were prepared. The barn was stocked, the house was tight, and they had enough supplies to weather anything. During a particularly brutal storm, Marian and Ethan spent 3 days snowed in, barely able to see past the windows. But instead of feeling trapped, Marian felt safe. They had everything they needed right here. On the third night, when the wind finally died down, they sat by the fire in what Marian was calling the library, though it was really just a room with books and comfortable chairs. "I've been thinking," Marian said. "Dangerous," Ethan teased. "I want to write a book about financial management for women. Everything I've been teaching in the meetings, but written down, so women who can't come here can still learn." Ethan looked at her, his expression serious. "That's a hell of an undertaking." "I know, but I think I can do it, and I think it could help people." "Then you should do it." "You don't think it's too ambitious?" "Marian, you're the least too ambitious person I know. If anything, you don't think big enough." He reached over and took her hand. "Write the book. I'll help however I can." So she started writing. Late at night, after her regular work was done, by lamplight in her office, she put words on paper. It was harder than she expected, translating what she knew into something clear and accessible, but she kept at it. Months passed. The manuscript grew. Ethan read drafts and offered feedback. Some of the women from the meetings contributed their stories. By the time spring came around again, Marian had something real. Not perfect, not finished, but substantial. She sent it to the newspaper editor who'd been printing her articles. 3 weeks later, she got a response. The editor wanted to publish it. Not just as articles, but as an actual book. She had a printer willing to take it on. Marian held the letter with shaking hands. "It's happening," she said to Ethan. "It's really happening." "Of course it is. I told you it would." The book was published in late summer. Financial Independence, A Woman's Guide to Money and Property by Marian Whitcomb Hale. The first edition was small, only 500 copies, but they sold out in 3 months. The editor ordered more, then more again. By the end of the year, Marian's book was being sold in 6 territories, and she was getting letters from women across the West. It was surreal, overwhelming, wonderful. And Marian, who'd spent so much of her life being told she was too old, too difficult, too much, finally understood something important. She'd never been too much. The world had just been too small. But she'd found her place anyway, built it with her own hands, her own mind, her own stubborn refusal to disappear. And she wasn't done yet. The success of the book brought attention Marian hadn't expected. Letters arrived weekly, then daily. Some were from women thanking her. Others were from lawyers and businessmen accusing her of promoting ideas that would destroy the natural order of society. A few were threats. Ethan read one of the nastier letters and threw it in the stove. "People are afraid of you." "Of me? I'm just a bookkeeper." "You're more than that now. You're proving women can understand money as well as any man. That scares people who've built their whole lives on the opposite being true." Marian sat at her desk, looking at the stack of correspondence. "Maybe I should stop, pull back." "Do you want to?" She thought about it. About Sarah Mitchell and the other women who'd found their footing through her help. About the letters from strangers saying her book had given them courage to leave bad situations, to start businesses, to demand what was rightfully theirs. "No," she said. "I don't want to stop." "Then don't." But the threats became harder to ignore. Someone threw a rock through her office window with a note tied to it. "Go back to your kitchen." Another time, they found their fence cut and cattle wandering onto the road. Small acts of sabotage that added up to a clear message. She wasn't welcome to keep doing what she was doing. Marian started carrying the Derringer again. Not in her petticoat this time, but in her desk drawer where she could reach it quickly. She hated that it had come to this, hated feeling like she needed protection in her own home. But she wasn't stupid. Scared men did dangerous things. The breaking point came on a cold November morning. Marian was working in her office when she heard horses outside. She looked up to see 3 men dismounting, not anyone she recognized. They were dressed too well for ranch hands, and something about the way they moved made her reach for the Derringer. She was halfway to the door when Ethan intercepted them outside. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could see the tension in Ethan's shoulders, the way he'd positioned himself between them and the house. Marian slipped the Derringer into her pocket and went out. "Don't care what authority you claim to have," Ethan was saying. "This is private property." The tallest of the 3 men had a hard face and expensive boots. "We're here on behalf of the Kansas Business Association. We have concerns about Mrs. Hale's activities." "What kind of concerns?" Marian asked, stepping up beside Ethan. The man's eyes flicked to her with barely concealed contempt. "You're encouraging women to challenge legitimate business contracts, to question their husbands' financial decisions, to behave in ways that are disruptive to commerce. I'm teaching them to read contracts and understand basic accounting. If that's disruptive, maybe the problem isn't my teaching." "You're causing trouble, Mrs. Hale, stirring up discontent. We're here to suggest you reconsider your current course of action." "That sounds like a threat," Ethan said quietly. "It's a warning. There are laws about inciting disruption, about operating businesses without proper oversight. We'd hate to see Mrs. Hale run afoul of such laws." Marian felt ice in her stomach, but she kept her voice steady. "I have every right to publish a book and offer bookkeeping services. If you think otherwise, take it up with a judge." "Perhaps we will." The man smiled, and it was the coldest thing Marian had seen since Crowley. "But legal proceedings can be expensive and time-consuming. Might be easier for everyone if you simply quieted down." "Get off my property," Ethan said. "Now." The men left, but the message was clear. Marian had made enemies. Powerful ones. That night, she and Ethan sat at the kitchen table, not eating the supper she'd made. It had gone cold while they talked in circles about what to do. You could write under a different name, Ethan suggested. Keep doing the work, but with less visibility. That feels like hiding. It is hiding, but it would keep you safe. Marian pushed food around her plate. She was 53 years old. She'd built something real, something important. And now men in expensive boots were telling her to be quiet. The old Marian, the one who'd stepped off that stagecoach 3 years ago, might have considered it, might have weighed the risks and decided survival was more important than pride. But that Marian was gone. The woman sitting here now had learned that being invisible was its own kind of death. No, she said, I won't hide. Then what? I'll be smarter, more careful, but I won't stop. Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. You know I support you, but I'm scared, Marian. These aren't small-town merchants with hurt feelings. These are people with real power. I know, and I'm scared too. She squeezed his hand. But if I stop now, what was it all for? The fights with Crowley, the barn burning, all the work. If I give up because someone threatens me, then they win. And every woman who might have found courage through my book stays trapped. You can't save everyone. No, but I can try to save someone, and maybe that someone saves someone else. That has to count for something. Ethan was quiet for a long time. Then he said, All right, but we do this together. No more going into town alone. No more meeting clients without someone else present. And we get better locks on all the doors. Deal. They reinforced the house over the next few weeks. New locks, shutters on the windows, and Tom showed Ethan how to set up an alarm system using bells and wire. It felt paranoid, but it also felt necessary. The harassment continued. More threatening letters. Someone poisoned 2 of their chickens. A client canceled, saying her husband had forbidden her from working with Marian. Then another. Then 3 more. But for every client who left, 2 new ones appeared. Women who'd heard about the threats and came specifically because they admired Marian's refusal to back down. The monthly meetings grew larger, sometimes drawing 20 or 30 women. Marian had to move them to the barn because the house couldn't hold everyone. Winter arrived with unusual warmth that year, and Marian used the milder weather to travel. She gave talks in neighboring towns about financial literacy, always with Ethan accompanying her. The audiences were mixed, some supportive, some hostile. At one event, a man stood up and called her a disgrace to womanhood. At another, a woman thanked her with tears streaming down her face. It was exhausting and exhilarating and terrifying all at once. In February, Marian got a letter from a lawyer in Topeka. He represented a group of women who wanted to petition the territorial legislature for expanded property rights. They wanted Marian's help preparing their case. This is big, Ethan said when she showed him the letter. If they succeed, they probably won't, Marian interrupted. The legislature is all men. They're not going to vote to give women more power. But they might. Stranger things have happened. Marian looked at the letter again. The lawyer was offering to pay her for her time and expertise. It was legitimate work, important work, but it would also make her a target for every man in the territory who believed women should stay in their place. She thought about the girl she'd been at 20, married to Robert and content with a small life. Thought about the woman she'd been at 45, widowed and scrambling for survival. And the woman she was now, 53, opinionated, refusing to be quiet. I'll do it, she said. The work consumed her for months. She compiled data on property ownership, inheritance laws, business regulations. She interviewed dozens of women about their experiences. She wrote reports, prepared testimony, refined arguments. The women's group in Topeka invited her to speak at their meetings. Marian went, despite Ethan's concerns, and addressed a room full of women who were wealthy and educated and nothing like her. But they listened, and they asked questions. And when she finished, they applauded. One of them, a banker's wife named Catherine, approached her afterward. You have a gift for making complex ideas accessible. Have you considered teaching formally? I'm not a teacher. You are, actually, just an informal one. But there are women's colleges starting to open, places that would pay you to share what you know. The idea was absurd. Marian Whitcomb, a professor, she had no formal education beyond basic schooling, no credentials, but she didn't dismiss it entirely. The petition went before the territorial legislature in May. Marianne traveled to the Capitol with the lawyer and 3 other women to present their case. She stood in a room full of men who looked at her like she was something distasteful, and she laid out the argument for why women deserved the same property rights as men. She expected dismissal, expected mockery. What she got was worse, polite attention followed by complete indifference. The legislators thanked them for their time and tabled the petition indefinitely. Outside the legislative building, one of the other women started crying. It was pointless. They were never going to listen. "Maybe not today," Marian said, "but we made them hear us. We put our arguments on record. That matters." "Does it? Nothing's going to change." Marian thought about that, about how many times she'd been told nothing would change, that she should accept her lot, be grateful for what little she had, stop causing trouble. "Change doesn't happen all at once," she said. "It happens in pieces. Today we planted a seed. Maybe it takes years to grow. Maybe we never see the harvest. But someone will." The woman wiped her eyes. "I hope you're right." "So do I." The trip back to Redstone was long and quiet. Ethan met her at the stagecoach stop, and she fell into his arms, exhausted. "How'd it go?" he asked. "About how I expected. They said no." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. We tried. That's more than most people can say." They rode home in comfortable silence. The prairie was green with spring growth, and the air smelled like rain. When they reached the house, Marian stood for a moment just looking at it. This place they'd built together. This life she'd carved out through sheer, stubborn will. "I'm proud of what we've done here," she said. "Me too." "Even though we haven't changed the world?" Ethan turned her to face him. "We've changed our world, and the worlds of everyone you've helped." "That's not nothing, Marian." She knew he was right, but there was still a part of her that wanted more. Wanted to see real systemic change. Wanted to know that all this fighting had been worth something bigger than herself. Summer brought new challenges. The Kansas Business Association filed a complaint against Marian, claiming she was practicing law without a license because she'd helped women understand contracts. It was a flimsy accusation. She'd never claimed to be a lawyer, but it meant more legal expenses, more stress. The case dragged on for months. In the end, it was dismissed, but the message was clear. They would keep coming after her, keep trying to shut her down. "How long can we keep fighting?" Marian asked one night. She was so tired, tired of being afraid, tired of looking over her shoulder, tired of defending her right to exist. "As long as we need to," Ethan said. But he looked tired too. That's when Marian made a decision. She couldn't control what men in power did. Couldn't force the legislature to change laws or make the business association stop harassing her. But she could control her own response. She stopped trying to win every fight. Started picking her battles more carefully. She kept working, kept writing, kept teaching. But she also started saying no to things that put her in unnecessary danger. Started protecting her energy for the work that mattered most. It felt like retreat at first, like she was giving up. But gradually she realized it wasn't retreat. It was strategy. She'd spent years proving she wouldn't be pushed around. Now she needed to prove she could sustain the work long term. By autumn, things had settled into a new rhythm. Marian's client list was smaller but more stable. The monthly meetings continued, though with better security. The book was in its third printing, and she'd started working on a second one about inheritance law. She was getting older. Her joints ached more. Her eyes tired faster. Gray hair had fully replaced the brown. But she was also getting wiser. Learning that persistence mattered more than perfection, that changing one life completely was better than changing 1,000 lives superficially. One October afternoon, a young woman showed up at the house. She couldn't have been more than 19, thin and nervous, with a bruise on her cheek she'd tried to hide with powder. "Mrs. Hale, I'm Anna Brennan." Marian went very still. Brennan. The name from Crowley's ledgers all those years ago. The $300 in unpaid debt that had started everything. "Come in," she said. Anna told her story haltingly. She was Crowley's niece. He'd been using her name to hide money from his wife, running up debts he never intended to pay. When Anna had found out and confronted him, he'd hit her and threatened worse if she told anyone. "I need help getting away from him," Anna said. "Everyone says you help women, so I came here." Marion looked at this girl who'd been used and abused by the same man who'd tried to destroy Marion, and she made a choice. "You can stay here," she said, "as long as you need." Anna stayed 3 weeks. Marion helped her understand the debt. And her name wasn't legally enforceable since she'd never signed anything. Helped her file a complaint against Crowley for fraud and assault. Connected her with a women's shelter in Topeka that could provide long-term protection. When Anna left, she hugged Marion tight. "You saved my life." "No, you saved your own life by having the courage to leave. I just gave you some tools." After Anna was gone, Marion sat in her office thinking about Crowley, about how his corruption had touched so many lives, about how she'd fought him for years and he'd never really faced consequences. But then again, maybe the consequences weren't her job. Maybe her job was just to help the people he'd hurt, to build something better than what he'd tried to destroy. That felt like enough. The years that followed blurred together in the best way. Marion turned 55, then 57, then 60. Ethan's hair went completely gray, and he started talking about selling off part of the cattle operation to make things easier. They were slowing down, both of them, but they were doing it together. The house they'd built became a fixture in the territory. Women came from increasingly far distances to attend meetings, to get advice, to learn. Some stayed for days, sleeping in the spare rooms, sharing meals, building community. Marion's second book was published, then a third. She started writing a regular column for the territorial newspaper about women's rights. She testified before the legislature 3 more times. They never passed the property rights petition, but they did make some smaller changes to inheritance law that helped. She didn't change the world, but she changed her corner of it. In the spring of her 61st year, Marion got a letter from a women's college in Missouri. They wanted her to come teach a summer seminar on financial literacy. The pay was modest, but it was real academic work. "Are you going to do it?" Ethan asked. "I don't know. It's a long way to travel." "But it's what you've been working toward, isn't it? Recognition that what you do matters?" Marion thought about that. About all the years of fighting to be seen, to be heard, to be taken seriously. "I think I've already been recognized by the people who matter," she said. "The women who write to me, who come here, who've changed their lives because of something I taught them. That's the recognition I needed. So no?" "I didn't say that." She smiled. "I'm thinking about it." In the end, she went. Ethan came with her, and they spent 6 weeks in Missouri while Marion taught a classroom full of young women about money, power, and independence. It was strange being in front of a formal class, strange being called Professor Hale, but it was also satisfying in a way she hadn't expected. On the last day, one of the students asked, "Mrs. Hale, do you have any regrets about how you've lived your life?" Marion thought about the question seriously. About the marriages she could have made that would have been easier. The job she could have kept if she'd been more compliant. The quiet, invisible life she could have accepted. "I regret the years I spent trying to be smaller than I was," she said finally. "I regret every time I apologized for knowing more than the men around me. I regret the time I wasted believing I was too old, too difficult, too much." She paused. "But I don't regret anything I've done since I stopped apologizing, even the hard parts, especially the hard parts." The student nodded, writing something in her notebook. Another hand went up. "What advice would you give to women our age? Don't wait for permission to live your life. Don't wait for the perfect moment or the right circumstances. Don't let anyone convince you that your best years are behind you or that you're too young to know your own mind." Marion looked around the room. "Whatever you want to do, start now. Today, this moment, because time is the one thing none of us can get back." The class ended with applause. Some of the students cried. They formed a line to thank her, to shake her hand, to ask for advice on their individual situations. Watching them, Marion felt something settle in her chest. This was her legacy. Not laws changed or systems overthrown, but individual women who now believed they could shape their own futures. That was enough. That was everything. She and Ethan returned to Kansas in late summer. The prairie had never looked more beautiful, golden grass rolling to the horizon, sky so blue it hurt to look at. The house stood solid and welcoming, exactly as they'd left it. "I miss this place," Marion said as they pulled up. "Me too, though Missouri was nice." "It was, but this is home." They settled back into their routine. Clients came and went. The monthly meetings continued. Marian started work on a fourth book, this one a memoir about her journey from desperate widow to successful businesswoman. She was 62 when the territorial legislature finally passed a version of the property rights petition. It wasn't everything they'd asked for, but it was something. Women could now own businesses outright in their own names, could inherit property without a male guardian, could enter into contracts without their husband's permission. The lawyer from Topeka wrote to tell Marian the news. "Your testimony made this possible," he wrote. "You should be proud." Marian read the letter twice, then set it aside. She felt pleased, satisfied even, but not vindicated, because the truth was, she'd stopped needing external validation years ago. She knew her worth. The women she'd helped knew it. That was enough. That evening, she and Ethan sat on the porch watching the sunset. They were older now, both of them. She needed reading glasses for her work, and he moved slower than he used to. But they were still here, still together. "Did you ever imagine this?" Marian asked. "When you first met me?" "Honestly? No, I thought you were impressive, smart, probably too good for Redstone. But I never imagined you'd become who you are now." "Who am I now?" Ethan thought about it. Someone who refused to disappear. Someone who took every obstacle and turned it into a stepping stone. Someone who changed lives, including mine. Marian felt her eyes sting. Even after all these years, Ethan could still make her cry with his simple honesty. "I was terrified when I came here," she said. "I thought I was starting over for the 100th time. Thought I'd work for Crowley for a few years, save some money, and eventually fade away like everyone expected." "But you didn't fade." "No, I didn't," she smiled. "I got stubborn instead." "Best decision you ever made." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned orange, then purple, then dark. Somewhere out on the prairie, a coyote called. The wind rustled through the grass, carrying the scent of coming autumn. Marian thought about the woman she'd been when she stepped off that stagecoach 6 years ago. Carrying everything she owned, no idea what was coming, just desperate determination to survive. If she could go back and tell that woman what was waiting, the love, the success, the impact, the life she'd build. She wasn't sure that woman would believe her, but she didn't need to go back. She was here now, living the life that woman had been too afraid to imagine. "Ethan?" "Yeah? Thank you. For seeing me when I was invisible. For standing beside me when I started to fight. For loving me when I thought I was too old to be loved." He reached over and took her hand. "Thank you for letting me. For choosing me. For building this life with me." They sat there holding hands until the stars came out. And Marian realized something she'd been too busy to notice before. She was happy. Genuinely, completely happy. Not because everything was perfect, it wasn't. Not because she'd won every fight, she hadn't. But because she'd stopped measuring her worth by other people's standards and started living by her own. She'd spent 50 years being told what she couldn't do, couldn't be, couldn't have. And she'd spent the last 6 years proving all of it wrong. Not because she was extraordinary, not because she was lucky, but because she'd refused to accept the story other people tried to write for her. She'd written her own story instead, and it was still being written. Years later, when Marian was 68 and Ethan was 65, they hosted one of the largest gatherings the house had ever seen. Women came from across the territory and beyond. Former clients, students, readers of her books, friends. Some were young, just starting their journeys. Others were Marian's age or older, pioneers in their own right. They gathered in the barn Ethan had rebuilt after the fire, the one that had become a symbol of their refusal to be destroyed. Someone gave a speech about Marian's contributions to women's financial literacy. Someone else talked about the laws that had changed in part because of her advocacy. Marian listened, uncomfortable with the praise but grateful for the community. When they asked her to speak, she stood slowly, her knees weren't what they used to be, and looked at all these faces. "I'm not good at speeches," she began. "I'm better with numbers than words. But I want to say something, so bear with me." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "When I was 50 years old, I thought my life was over. I'd lost everything. I had nothing. I was invisible to everyone around me." She looked around the room. "What I didn't understand then was that being invisible gave me freedom, because when no one's watching, when no one expects anything from you, you can become whoever you want to be. I didn't start out brave, I started out desperate. But desperation and courage look the same from the outside. And eventually, if you keep moving forward, Desperation turns into determination, and determination turns into strength. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to keep showing up, keep trying, keep refusing to disappear. That's all any of us can do. She sat down to applause that echoed off the barn walls. Ethan squeezed her hand, and Marian felt the weight of all these years settle on her shoulders. Not heavy, but solid. Real. She'd lived a life that mattered, not because she'd changed everything, but because she'd changed something. And in the end, that was the only thing any of them could hope for. That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, Marian stood at her office window looking out at the prairie. The moon was full, turning everything silver and strange. Ethan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. They stood like that for a long moment, two people who'd found each other when neither was looking, who'd built something neither could have built alone. "Any regrets?" Ethan asked softly. Marian thought about it, about the battles fought and lost, about the victories that came too late or not at all, about all the things she'd wanted to change but couldn't. "No," she said finally, "not anymore." Because the truth was, her greatest chapter hadn't ended when she turned 50. It had just begun. And she'd lived it fully, fiercely, exactly as she chose. She was Marian Whitcomb Hale, widow, bookkeeper, author, advocate, teacher, wife. A woman who'd refused to be invisible, who'd built a life of purpose and meaning out of nothing but determination and stubborn hope. And that, she thought, was more than enough. It was everything.